Thanks for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Noma Cork by Vinventions. Driven by a commitment to innovation, the new plant-based Noma Cork Green Line offers significant improvements in wine closure performance. Thanks to a rigorous oxygen ingress rate, you can decide which cork is best for your wine, whether it's for young and fresh wines or for those with ageing potential.
Gavin Quinney started his working life as a porter at an auction house before moving into the burgeoning computer industry in the mid-1980s. A visit to Bordeaux in 1999 persuaded him to buy a struggling château in the Entre-Deux-Mers. Listen to us discuss how he's turned the place around since then, with a little help from celebrity chefs Gordon Ramsay and Stein, his views on the future of Bordeaux, and why he's really angry about UK excise duty. Hello, Gavin. How are you?
Tim, very nice to be with you.
Oh, likewise. It's very nice to hear your voice. And you're in Bordeaux, I'm sure, aren't you? And probably flowering at the moment in the vineyards.
Yeah, we're just sort of not quite the end of flowering. I mean, the Cabernet's still going. So pretty good flowering.
Been out there today?
It's floraison, yeah.
Checking the vineyards.
I'm always out there checking, Tim. That's work too. Yeah, I like to count the bunches. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because that's money in the end, isn't it? The bunches. I mean,
you need a belle sortie, which we've had. Certainly, Bordeaux has had that. And then obviously flowering is pretty critical. So I do spend a bit of time looking at that. And then of course, just up the road last week they had hail. So, you are always conscious of potential disasters. So.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't realise until, I know you pretty well, but I didn't realise a bit of your past. You're actually a farm boy. You were born on a farm in Worcestershire, yeah? I just wondered what kind of farm it was.
Yeah, well, it was, at the time, it's sort of all sorts, but really a dairy farm at the time. And Quinney's Dairies, it was actually quite a big operation in the Midlands, Worcester, Warwickshire borders in the 60s before it was taken over by the dreaded Milk Marketing Board. Yeah. So dairy was big. In fact, my cousin Adam Quinney, he's a proper farmer. Not like Jeremy Clarkson or some wine dandy like me. He's a proper. So he still farms there. So my first cousin Adam does that.
And any vineyards nearby in those days? Probably not, were there?
No. I don't know about many vineyards nearby now. I mean, there's the three counties. So I wouldn't say it's prime terroir where we were even today. But I may be wrong. Somebody's going to tell me I'm wrong.
So you didn't go to farming. I mean, you also didn't go to university. It's interesting. I mean, you told me that punk got in the way of your Greek studies. We were about the same age, and so we were probably listening to punk about the same time. So which bands were you into? Were you a Pistols fan? I mean, were you doing the full bin liner and safety pins?
I was. I did get into that. I dyed my hair orange. Put in the Tida hair straightener, and which didn't work. I was quite into punk. That hit me at just the wrong age. I became rebellious somewhere between quite successful O levels, I'd say. When I must have been a model student then, but then sort of 17, 18, it all went pear shaped. I don't know about getting in the way of Greek, but so English and history, but then Greek waned and then art. I got kicked out of the art school for smoking. So it didn't quite work out. Going back to your question of the bands, I saw the Clash a lot. I loved the Jam. The Sex Pistols didn't last that long. No. I never see them, but I was really into those early days, so.
They're an amazing band, were they? I mean, you then got a job at Christie's, didn't you? What were you doing there?
Yeah, well, straight after school, so in beginning of September, after I left in the summer, so I got a job as a porter in the pictures department, pictures being old master paintings, really, not the modern stuff. But it was actually a really fascinating job. And I think being a porter at Christie's and it's such a great part of London, King Street, St. James's. It was a great introduction to London and the art world and all that. And so my gap year then went on into another one, so I stayed, but then I got the London bug a bit.
Did you get to handle any masterpieces or not?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, proper stuff. Yeah. And looking back, looking back at we thought they were all so expensive then, but of course I suppose it's a bit like Bordeaux first growths, then compared to what they are now. So, the numbers have just spiraled out of control, obviously. So very different. But a great time. So a lot of those people on Antiques Roadshow, I still look fondly back at a lot of them. All of them were my bosses.
And then you got a job in the wine business, didn't you? At a company called, a bizarre name, Wine Growers Association. And you did your first exams, did your high certificate, you got a distinction, all set for a successful career in the wine trade. What happened? I'd have thought, you've ended up with a successful career in the wine trade, but not the one you expected, right? Yeah. It ended a little unhappily at Wine Growers Association. I think it's, truth be told, actually, I fell out with my boss and got fired and claimed for unfair dismissal, and I won, and that gave me a nice little break. So no, it was the best of times and the worst of times. No, it was good, but I did fall in love with wine for sure. No question. Through that. So you'd got the bug, even though you lost the job. Oh
yeah. No, I definitely got the bug, from top to bottom, the great stuff. And if you think back to those days, stuff like, California, early 70s vintages, 73, 74, things like that. I was totally smitten by wines from all over the world, actually.
And your next job was something where you stayed a long time, didn't you? Which was called Computer Centre. And this was presumably back in Amstrad days, was it? Had the Amstrad come out? I think my first computer was an Amstrad. I bought around then, 85, 86.
Yeah. So actually, fun enough, we were IBM and Compaq dealers. In fact, we were IBM's biggest dealer. We were Compaq's biggest dealer. Toshiba later on. Do you remember those?
Yeah, I do.
Balls. So it was a small, medium-sized company when I joined, and then it became quite a big business. In fact, actually, talking about Amstrad, I actually sold Amstrad some IBM PCs. I think they then probably dissected them, and then they brought out their copy. So I didn't tell too many people about that, but I think I might have been the source of handing over the
Oops, you helped Alan Sugar. Oh God! Yeah. But you stayed there for 14 years till 1998. You ended up being head of national sales, and that's a pretty important job. Was it fun? Did it teach you stuff about business?
Oh God, yeah. No, it was really fun. So I started as a sort of junior salesman. In fact, if you go onto the Computer Centre website, bearing in mind Computer Centre has an A in the middle and ER on the end, very dodgy
computer
spelling.
Yeah.
I know, despite being a British business at the time, that was the spelling. But if you go onto their website and just flick down to the history page, you'll see me with an old IBM PC and one of the first Macs. Looking quite dated. Certainly, I was, and the computers too. But I think it must be their only photos where they had the Apple Mac and the IBM PC in the same one with me in it. But yeah, so started as a salesman, ended up running a branch, then London regional manager, then head of sales nationally, and we became even then in the mid to late 90s, a very successful business. We turned over £1 billion in 1997, which was my last year, which was just phenomenal. I had about 5,000 staff, I think. So it was a proper business. But then it floated in 98. And so I was 37 then and regarded as one of the old boys. So it's time to let new blood come through.
And you had some share options, so presumably made a bit of cash out of it. Not enough, obviously, to buy a football club. But could you have retired?
No, I don't think so. And also, 37. Things could have gone very differently. I invested in a .com business which went horribly pear-shaped. And every time someone says, "Did you keep a flat in London?" I always think, well, if I'd only invested the money in the flat rather than this .com business, things might have been very different. Yeah, so it's rather sad. It was a very, most of my colleagues thought I was one very lucky bastard, with the timing and, the time when I joined the management team and got the share options, giving up a sales salary, as it were, and things like that. But it all worked out well. But if you remember back then, 98, 99, .com time was a very hazardous place to be when you had shares in one of those businesses. So it was quite a nervy time as well.
I mean, you then went on gardening leave, didn't you? And you took advantage of that to start visiting wine regions. I mean, you were already interested in wine. I think you went all over the world, didn't you?
Yeah. No, it was great. So I went to principally, so 98, 99, principally, I'd been around Europe quite a bit. I'd been to South Africa already a couple of times. And then, so I went to your love, Argentina, and Chile. And then the other side of the world went to Australia and then came back and then went to New Zealand. And it was a bit like nowadays where everyone runs around all the chateaux at Entre-Deux-Mers time. I tried to get to as many vineyards in my time in those countries that I could. And I learned an awful lot. And I just became hooked. So I'm in Australia. I mean, I went from everywhere from Margaret River to Coonawarra, Barossa, Adelaide Hills, to Hunter, the whole shebang really. So, Clare Valley to see the Rieslings, and so on. So I was really on the hunt to learn a lot more with, I can tell you, absolutely zero interest in buying.
Oh, right. I was going to ask you that. You didn't actually buy something, you just learned.
No. I mean, I was offered one opportunity in New Zealand, but that's a long way away. So.
Instead of which, you went to the London Wine Fair, the Olympiad, which was a big deal in those days, wasn't it, in May 99? And a friend said to you, why don't you go to Vinexpo, which is a big trade fair down in Bordeaux? And that meeting kind of changed your life, didn't it? I mean, does the friend still exist, and do you talk to him about it?
Yeah, well, it's strange thinking about, very sadly, Steve died a couple of years ago.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
We're the same age. And, but amazingly, in answer to your question, he came to stay actually where I'm sitting now in our farmhouse, about 5 years after we bought Beauduc. And he came with his daughter, Emma, and there was a young guy working for us at the time who was a former young headhunter in London who wanted to buy a vineyard. And he came and worked for us, 04, 05. And I was doing my best to try and put him off buying a vineyard. And as one thing led to another, that was during Vinexpo as well. So that must have been 05. And then Alex sat next to Emma. So this was Steve's daughter. And they got on really well, started going out. And they ended up having their wedding reception here at Beauduc a couple of years in 2007. And now they live. And Alex has still not bought a vineyard, very sensibly. He's in the wine business, in the vineyard business. And he and Emma have 2 boys and live about 10 minutes up the road. So that all came, you joined.
All through Beauduc, one meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, you liked Bordeaux so much, didn't you? You liked the city, you liked the sunshine and the region. You went back a month later and you went to Beauduc. Amongst other places, you went to a tasting at Beauduc. What made you go to Beauduc?
Well, I'd got this sort of feeling going around, Vinexpo, June 99, the sun was shining. Bordeaux had lots of potential. I went out to the coast as well, went around some vineyards. And then I thought, well, I want to go back and have another look because this is actually beginning to, Bordeaux's much closer than any of the other places I've talked about. And, the connections are quite good and it had the right sort of vibe. And I ended up sort of looking at vineyards specifically, talking to a few people, and it was actually Bob Watts at Château de Soy who said, "Oh, go to," it. And I think he wrote. Oh no, it was not him, somebody else, but they wrote down on a post-it note, "Beauduc," and you pronounce it beautifully, Tim, because you're well rung up in wine, but it is great. And I said, "How do you pronounce that?" And they said, "Oh, it's Beauduc." And so I came here for a tasting. And I thought, oh, it's nice. And I did have a feeling when I came into the property as I drove down the drive. I mean, strange as it may seem, and it might seem like happenstance afterwards, but I did have a feeling about it. The wine was very good, and the guy told me, the owner said that he was in the process of selling it. And I said, oh, do you mind me asking how much for? Because when somebody says they're in the process of selling it, it's almost easier to ask how much than it's for sale. And it was exactly the same price as a house that we were interested in buying in London, in Putney, funnily enough, around the corner from you. And the house in Putney has obviously subsequently gone up a lot more in value. But it was what was it, nearly 200 acres. With a chateau, with a separate farmhouse, a winery. Obviously, what I didn't realize at the time, but a money pit. But at the same time, it seemed like a huge opportunity. And back then, of course, do you remember the old 10 francs to the pound? And we're talking, I suppose, in today's rates, about 150, euros to the pound. So the exchange rate was quite positive as well. We just expected that. And so I actually phoned Angela the next day after this extensive tasting.
This is your wife, yeah?
My wife, Angela, yeah. I phoned her in Wandsworth, and I said, what do you think about living in France? Really, because we'd sort of talked about it. And she said, do you know what? I think it'd be a great idea. I hadn't mentioned the vineyard at this point. And I said, well, that's good, because I've just bought a chateau. And although I could have wriggled out of it, she came down the next day, and so we saw this and one other property, and I think the timing was such. This was July, and we thought it's now or never. We do it. We had 2 kids, Sophie, Georgie 4, Sophie 2. We'd either do it now or never, and so due diligence went out the window. And we moved down here and moved into this farmhouse at the end of August, 99. So completely bonkers.
So within 2 months, really, of arriving at Vinexpo, you owned a chateau.
Yeah. Well, actually, I didn't own it. We were sorting out all the the paperwork, which took some time, actually. That seemed like a breeze, but actually there was quite a lot of complications.
And was it scary? I mean, did you speak good French at the time or not?
No. So what do you call it? Schoolboy holiday, corporate French, that sort of thing. I think that was that was a worry. But really, this sort of we had, and I'd certainly had a really good run in London. 20 years in London, and it had been great. And I knew it might not be anywhere near as good, and we were going to give up a lot, but it seemed like this. You don't get those sort of opportunities to live a different life very often, and so we went for it, for better or for worse.
And you arrived to pick the 99 vintage, which wasn't the greatest, was it? I mean, do you have any idea, or did it start to dawn on you what you were letting yourself in for?
Yeah, well, there were moments, I must say. To be fair, 99, there's some good wines from 99. Margaux had a good run in. I don't mean Chateau Margaux, but it was a good appellation in Margaux, a good vintage in Margaux, and others. I'm getting a bit detailed there, but it was. I do remember picking quite rotten Merlot grapes with Barbara Abraham, who's a master of wine, and in the pouring rain, and it was one of those sort of. She was looking at me like, "Do you really know what you're doing with this?" But fun enough, the Sauvignon worked out really well, and that wine put us in good. That actual wine put us in good stead. I think the red was not one of our greatest, to be fair.
That vintage, yeah.
But the investment in the vineyard, just not surprisingly, had gone down a lot. So if you don't put the effort into, it's the same today. If you don't put the right treatments in against your mildew or your pourriture or what, if you don't put that in, it's difficult.
I wonder, what do you know now that you wish you'd known then? Was it just money? How much it would cost?
Gosh, I'd almost need a few pages to think about that. No, I think we rushed in a bit with spending money. It's so easy to throw money at a vineyard and a winery, and we're doing up a chateau as well. The budget just flew out the entire budget flew out the door in a couple of months, sort of thing. So I think, and I think there's always a general, there's two perceptions I think that people have, and I'm making this up as I go along, but there's one is people always think they'll do a better job, make a better product than was made previously in a vineyard. So and sometimes that may or may not be the case. But the other thing is, I think people think that straight away you go in and you make a living. You will have your costs and then you'll sell the wine for a profit and you'll make a living. Well, that's really quite a tough gig in wine. And it was then, and it is now. It's the same thing, and we spent too much money really.
At the start. Yeah.
At the start. I mean, we had too many staff. I didn't realize that actually you need the right staff at the right time rather than too many permanent staff, things like that. But talking about the staff, we have had Daniel and Nelly with us since that first vintage, and that's been absolutely critical to us.
I mean, you got a very big break. I would call it a lucky break because you make your own luck, really, thanks to two famous chefs. So Gordon Ramsay and Rick Stein, both of whom have been very good to your wine and indeed liked your wine. Just how did you meet those two guys?
Yeah, I mean, that's two chapters of the book. In brief. So Ramsay, I went to lunch actually by chance. In fact, I'd done somebody a favor, and he took me to Ramsay's to lunch. That would have been in the summer of 2000, and I had actually been quite a good customer of Ramsay's previous establishment. He didn't own it. He was the chef at a place called Aubergine. Do you remember Aubergine?
I remember that. Yeah.
Very good restaurant, really fantastic restaurant, good value, great wine list. And in fact, I was hoping to meet, I think he was called Thierry, the sommelier at Aubergine. But he'd been replaced. I got introduced by, you remember Jean-Claude, the maitre d', he's actually just retired from Restaurant Gordon Ramsay. So he's been with Ramsay for many, many years, from Aubergine all the way through. And I was introduced by Jean-Claude to a pimply young Yorkshireman from Scarborough called Ronan Sayburn. And Jean-Claude said, Ronan, this is Gavin, a very good customer of ours before, and he's bought this château in Bordeaux and makes delicious wine. Would you like to try it? So he laid it on, and Ronan, you could see his eyes rolling, thinking, oh, here we go again. But actually, we got on really well. Sorry, it is a long story, but Ronan's version of events is much better than mine. Mine's more protracted and designing the label with Ramsay's signature on, which is what happened, blah, blah, blah. But Ronan tells the story that I actually took 2 bottles of wine into the restaurant with me for lunch. I mean, can you imagine? You pull out one bottle and then another, because he said the first bottle was corked, but I had another bottle with me, can you believe, of the Sauvignon Blanc. Which we called Bordeaux Blanc at the time. So Château Bordeaux Blanc. And, so he took it at the back, and he says today, he really liked the wine, the non-corked bottle. And at the end of service, he gave a glass to Gordon and said, what do you think of this wine? And Gordon really liked it. And then Ronan came out and said, we're considering it as a house wine. What do you think? Now, that's not quite how it happened, but it's not far off. He's just sort of shrunk it by about 2 months or 3 months.
But that's a massive break. What a break.
But it was a massive break. And I did say, so we did design the label with the Château label with Ramsay's signature on, which was part of the restaurant, and it's still part of the restaurant logo today, I think. And Rick Stein,
you were down in Padstow?
Yeah. And the interesting thing then as well, after that, they got their 3rd Michelin star. So that was quite important to go in when they just had the 2. But so Padstow, I went down. In fact, we had Ronnie Arnold, Jill Stein's sister, Veronica. So Ronnie was here a few weeks ago, staying in our farmhouse. And I said to her, can you remember, Ronnie, exactly what happened? And it was a similar thing, because I remember it being quite a protracted business. I definitely remember going down there, seeing Rick, seeing Ronnie, chasing it up, phone calls, all this sort of thing, faxes or whatever it was. But she said, no, I brought down 2 bottles, and I gave her a bottle and I gave Rick a bottle, and they both liked it. And they said, yeah, that's great. And
we'll have it.
We'll have it. And again, I did the label with his signature on. And so we've always been one of their special selections. And that was mentioned by Victoria Moore in the Telegraph quite recently about how we got there, and they still love it, and they've been great supporters, as they have 2 of the rosé too. So it's been house. I was there for about 10 years too.
Well, and it was great that you had those guys backing you, because you lost a lot of your existing clients, not your existing clients, but the Chateau's existing clients. How did you manage to lose them?
It's not hard. It's quite hard to gain customers. It's very easy to lose them, especially in wine. And because the previous customers mostly came through the Place, Bordeaux Négociants, and wine, as you know, through at our level, at Bordeaux generic level, is and always has been pretty inexpensive. And so, because we'd invested quite a lot and we wanted to get more value, after all, the previous owner had sold because he was losing money, so we took quite drastic steps, maybe a bit too drastic, but we lost all the trade customers. And at the same time, although I had the success with Ramsay's and Stein, simultaneously I was talking to a few London wine merchants, and not surprisingly said, there's absolutely no market for Bordeaux Sauvignon. It was then that I started to think, so that's when I got onto the direct model kind of thing, because we had to get the wine to the restaurants. So then I was in a position to provide wine to other customers as well. So we completely circumnavigated I was really shocked by the trade system here back in the day. I remember, considering how direct really the computer business was. And people even more direct than us. You mentioned Amstrad, or Dell, or people like that. And I was just amazed that chateaus went through courtiers, who went through négociants, who went through importers or agents.
So all these middlemen, basically.
I just couldn't believe it. Yeah. And so I suppose I wasn't well disposed to continue down that route, but it was a bit drastic. We lost a lot of business.
But your computer background helped you to develop e-commerce, didn't it? And also direct sales, I suppose, in a way, in that you were used to being in business. Was that how you started to build the business?
Yeah, actually, we started building the business. It was so I suppose, going back to my sort of gardening leave phase, I sort of wanted to do something with my computer industry background and wine, but it was a little bit early. If we think, Google was only founded in 1998. So I think it was a little bit, most of the names in wine, many of those names then have gone. So it was probably a little bit early for, proper online sales when I'm talking about the early 2000s. And so we did a physical newsletter, and we built that business from actually just asking people to hand us their Christmas card lists. Mm-hmm. And if people from their list bought wine, we would give them, a bottle free sort of thing towards their next order. So we sort of grew the physical mailing list quite substantially, actually, in the early days. So we sent out a thing called La Gazette, which was an 8-page physical thing, bit of chat, bit of wine stuff, with a little envelope. So that's how that ran. And actually, it was quite a successful way of doing it. And we did repay.
So the e-commerce came later, didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Our first proper website was probably 2003, and then really 2008, and then obviously we've had to change it. And I slightly, in a way, I do a monthly email, the occasional offers, but actually, fun enough, maybe I should go back to La Gazette. I think once in a while.
I liked La Gazette. It was really good. Yeah, it was fun.
I think once in a while that might be. Maybe we should do that. Yeah. I think it's all gone a bit online, and offers on email and stuff like that. So,
just tell us how many wines you make now, because you've got quite a diverse range, haven't you, of whites and reds and other stuff as well.
Yeah. So, that's one of the things. I think if you partly the nature of selling direct, but also a lot of the properties around us, do make. We make a Sauvignon Blanc and a Semillon. We happen to keep those separate generally. We make 2 reds. One is a oak aged, slightly more expensive cuvee in smaller numbers. Then we do a Crémant, which has been very successful. We'd never dreamt of that at the start, but we planted a vineyard in 2004 and then made our first vintage in 2014, 10 years later,
Wow.
So we make a Crémant. We have done a Sauterne before, not from our vineyard, but from working with a grower down in Sauterne, which proved successful. We should probably do that again, but I've just been a bit busy, I suppose. But yeah, full range. And I think quite a lot of our neighbours do a full range too,
And how many hectares do you have total?
So 25 around the property, around the chateau in a single block, around the chateau and the winery in a single block. And then we have 6.5 hectares up the road, which, funnily enough, are mostly Cabernet Franc, which we use for making the rosé. Because we've got quite a lot of Merlot here, and I needed to balance it with some Cabernet. So that's on a lease. But so in all, 31 something like that. So 75 acres or so.
And you're in a place called Crillon, which is in the Entre-Deux-Mers, between the two rivers rather than seas. I mean, even its greatest fans will not say it's the most prestigious part of Bordeaux, but I just wonder how hard it is to compete with the top names, with the first growth that's sort of and second growth and all those things and the top right bank properties. Because a lot of petits châteaux are struggling, aren't they? I mean, you're doing it, making a good profit now, but it's not been easy, is it?
No, it's not been easy. So there's several questions in there. So I'd say the last bit, just taking the last bit, I think of course, there's a lot of petits chateaux that are struggling. There are, though, a lot that I think are doing pretty well. They have a good range. They have good direct export customers, whether they're, if I think around here, I mean, there's around Crillon, which is sort of like the main market town in the Entre-Deux-Mers now, probably about 25 kilometers from Bordeaux. But around us, we've got well-known names, Château Tully, Château Fontenil, Grand Verdú, not far up the road, a bit further up the road, much bigger property in Château Bonnet and places like that. So lots of good producers, lots of them doing very well with a good broad range, but a zillion small producers who are really struggling. And I would say as a general, not so much necessarily just around here. In fact, we're probably one of about 2 or 3 chateaux in Crillon, not many, but generally in the Entre-Deux-Mers, people think of the Entre-Deux-Mers as a white wine region, but actually that's where the sort of bulk of Bordeaux, generic Bordeaux red and Bordeaux Superior red comes from. And, across the board, if you look at the whole piece, I'd say about 40% of the massive Bordeaux vineyard is probably unprofitable and won't ever be profitable. So it's got serious issues. But in my opinion, too much red wine is made. It's planted with 90%.
And that's
red.
Why stuff's being pulled out, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's 90% red Bordeaux with, production-wise, 85%, 5% rosé, 10% white, and that's both dry and sweet white. But there's just too much Bordeaux red being made. I mean, that's the biggest struggle, which has got nothing to do with the top wines and the Primeurs circus and all the rest of it. In fact, even on Twitter, you could look at people saying, the prices are crazy, even today or whenever, the prices are crazy on Primeur, for the top chateaus. And then people in the same argument saying, but why are they ripping out vines? Well, it's two totally different things, of course.
They're different worlds.
They're different world, completely.
Yeah.
You've got people who can't sell their wine at well under €1 a litre, let alone, a top second growth would come out at £2,000 a case. So it's a different, and that's the second.
And that's in bond, so you'd have to pay VAT and duty and all that stuff.
Yeah, so it's a different world. But I don't think Bordeaux is actually very good at allying itself as a whole to this fantastic publicity machine of these fantastic properties. We should. I don't see them as. I see them as friends, and I genuinely do. Most of those people, they are friends, and I see them as friends. We just have a slightly different product and a different price point.
Because you get to go and taste those wines because you're partly a journalist as well. You do a bit of journalism for LiveX and Jancis Robinson. You do a very good annual report on Bordeaux on the vintage. I mean, do you enjoy that bit of what you do? A bit of fun?
Yeah, I do actually. I've got a little bit too geeky with it. I think most people would look at it and say, do we really need that much detail about the weather? But actually, I sort of started it because I think back in the day, there was, and at all times, there are misconceptions about vintages and weather and, and then I mentioned the hail, but you want to tell the truth about these things. And so I get quite factual about yields and weather conditions and so on. And also we've got we've had a string of fantastic vintages, all the way from pretty much '09. I think, we've had some, a couple of downers, but really some amazing vintages in the last 15 years or so. And people, I think, are quite thirsty for the information. And I think a lot of other journalists and a lot of chateaus quite like to see my reports, because I don't talk about just one particular region. I talk about the weather conditions across the whole of Bordeaux and things like that. So,
and people can get them free, can't they? I mean, they have to subscribe to Jancis's site, but on LiveX it's free, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's free on Jancis too. I insist, that it's free. You can get it on the slightly less visited GavinQuinney.com and just go under Bordeaux reports. You'll see,
and they're all there, right?
And if you want to see anything, just go in the search box and type frost or type hail, and you'll get the full ghoulish, the reports and everything. But I do like to taste the top wines as well, because otherwise, if I didn't taste all the wines, the Primeur Circus, the Primeurs, the Union de Grand Cru and the top wines, then it would be a bit pointless trying to understand the impact of the weather on the vintage.
And I should also say people should also follow you on Twitter, Gavin Quinney, your name, on Twitter, because you're outspoken about politics and also about duty levels, aren't you? I mean, you're always putting really good graphics up about duty levels, just showing people, particularly in the UK, how much of a bottle of wine that they buy in the UK goes to the government, right?
Yeah, I do. I've always had a slight beef with it, really, I suppose. But none more so than at the moment, Now,
because it's about to change, isn't it, in August?
Yeah. I mean, the whole wine trade has been 95% of the wine trade have been up in arms about the concept of taxing wine, imposing duty on wine based on the level of alcohol. That's just in the same way that you do with beer and spirits or whatever, which is ludicrous. You manufacture spirits to 37.5% vol. Wine isn't made like that. And many of the big independents, there I could think of lots of people with between, 2 to 7,000 product lines. Well, if you start taxing it on the level of alcohol, you've got to change those every year. But more to the point, I don't mind so much the duty increase, but when we think, your friends, my friends in England, £8 on a bottle of wine would be seen by a lot of people as not expensive, but sort of the upper limit of what they would spend, because the national average at retail is £6.50 or something.
Still,
But from August, on a £8 bottle of wine from the 1st of August, 50% is UK tax. So you're left with £4, which includes the retailer margins and any other margins, the bottling, the distribution, the shipping, and then the wine, and then people always talking about sustainability. Well, you can't do much about sustainability when you've got 70p's worth of wine in the bottle. So I just think, and of course I wasn't very keen when with Brexit, when the government changed the rule that within the EU you could transport as much wine as you liked for your own use, from normally back from France to the UK, and then it's now limited to 24 bottles plus a few bottles.
So that affected you as well, yeah?
Yeah, but I think just generally, if people wanted to come across and explore wine regions, you want to go back with it. I did before I came here. I used to buy, you just want to, and then you drive back. I'm not saying that they're going to get stopped necessarily, but you are supposed to pay duty on it, and that's a shame. I think it's a shame.
I admire your outspokenness on Twitter, I must say. Listen, last question. You're a big Chelsea fan. You even fly over to watch all of the home games. You've got a season ticket, haven't you? Yeah. Is that your main interest outside wine, or are there other things that interest you too?
Football generally. Sport, actually, fun enough, Angela's more keen on sport. She'll watch the tennis, the cricket, absolutely everything. I mean, she'll fly back to go and sit with her dad at Lord's and all the rest of it. So but thankfully the kids are into, so I go with Georgie and Bugs often to Chelsea. So it's a good reason to have brought them up as Chelsea fans, but I get to see them. So, it's, with travel, let's not date this episode too much by talking about the problems that Chelsea are having, but, other things, I mean, wine and football take up quite a big stuff. But of course, within that, there's all your friends and family and socializing And yeah, I like cooking as well, actually. I quite like a bit of cooking. So it'd be good to see you down here, Tim, and maybe we'll have a little Côte de Boeuf and a glass of tasty.
I think a Côte de Boeuf and a bottle of your wine sounds very good. Or several bottles of your wine sounds great. Listen, Gavin, it's been great talking to you. Thank you for sharing your story with me today, and see you very soon.
Thank you, Tim. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
What a great and inspiring tale. Whoever said that owning a chateau was easy didn't know the reality. But Gavin has succeeded at Chateau Bordeaux. Our guest next week on Cork Talk is the brilliant wine auctioneer Charlie Foley from Christie's. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @TimAtkin and on Instagram @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.